In this exchange, Simon Marks joins Matt Fry to discuss the massive changes happening around the White House ahead of the upcoming royal visit. What starts as a conversation about construction projects connected to the royal visit quickly turns into a wider debate about building giant ballrooms, redesigning historic landmarks, and even preparing UFC fights outside the White House, while critics accuse him of acting more like a monarch than a president. But the exchange gets even more interesting when they begin linking all of this to rising gas prices, corruption concerns, and growing frustration from Trump supporters who believe he's losing touch with ordinary Americans. Let's get into the video. I'll tell you exactly what I think after the exchange at the end. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from down in the comment section.
Well, I have two words for you. One is Simon and the other one is Marks. And there he is sitting in front of the White House. What we can't see is the building side of the big, beautiful ballroom that is in a state of not being built, which would have been used for the state banquet, would it not, Simon, for the King's visit?
Absolutely, Matt. And he was talking about that, of course, in the Oval Office on Thursday when he was asked a question about some comments that Prince Harry had made urging President Trump to get more involved in trying to bring peace to Ukraine. And he immediately went off on a riff about how it's such a shame that the ballroom isn't complete because they don't have enough seats for the state banquet. But for 150 years, successive presidents have wanted this ballroom, which of course is complete fiction, absolutely made up. But, you know, I was on the roof earlier in the week, and it's not now just the East Wing of the White House, which of course has been demolished and is being redeveloped as the ballroom that is under construction. In Lafayette Park, which, as you know, of course, is the park right in front of the White House, Lafayette Park is basically at this point almost entirely closed. And construction is underway of the huge arena, temporary arena, where President Trump, in time for the July the 4th 250th birthday commemorations, which of course is the whole purpose of the King's visit next week to kick off that commemoration, President Trump is building a massive temporary arena because he's going to be hosting a universal fighting championship set of bouts directly in front of the White House. His view on the best way to commemorate 250 years of American independence is to do so not only with the traditional red coats that we'll see on hand when the King arrives here with their flutes and their piccolos and the drummers all done up in their traditional garb. He thinks that what the country really needs is for the Universal Fighting Championship to be holding a series of bouts directly in front of the White House, as it will be doing in July. So there is so much construction taking place around the White House that it's very difficult now for visitors actually to see very much of the building at times. And when you look at it from above, all you see are diggers and cranes and the noises of construction that really underscore the physical changes to the skyline in this city that President Trump is determined to bring about.
And I love the fact that he's bringing the Colosseum to Washington, finally. You know, the end of days, end of Rome. What about the reflector pool? This is the pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Between that memorial and the Washington Memorial, the big cenotaph, the needle that sticks above the skyline of Washington. He wants to change that as well. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, he is refurbishing the reflecting pool. I mean, he has been, over the past week, given everything that's taking place in the world, right? The future of Iran at stake, issues within his own administration here in the United States, his plunging approval ratings, the need of Republican lawmakers up on Capitol Hill urgently for the president to focus on getting the price of petrol reduced at the pumps, or else their goose will be cooked in November's midterm elections. Given all of that, the amount of time that he spent this week talking about refurbishment in detail, sounding as ever far more like the real estate magnate, the property and construction developer that he really is, rather, of course, than the politician that he really isn't very good at being, was astonishing. So one of these projects is the refurbishment of the reflecting pool, a huge landmark here in the city. It sits at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. The president was at pains to say that it was around the reflecting pool that 1 million people gathered for Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, but then he immediately went on to say that he had attracted more people than that around the reflecting pool. I think he was suggesting during his inauguration, so we were back to crowd size again. They're actually, I mean, it's fair to say that the reflecting pool probably was in need of a bit of a clean-up, but what he's doing is bringing construction folks in to replace its floor with a blue bottom, so that it's going to look a little bit like a swimming pool. I mean, that's how he described it. Again, all of this being done without necessarily any of the permissions that previous presidents would previously have sought. And that's before we get to the massive triumphal arch that, of course, he wants to build here in Washington, replete with gold chariots and lions on the top and an inscription that reads "One Nation Under God," that is forever going to change the skyline here. So he is determined to get all of this stuff done. One of the issues this week that we learned about was the firing of the Navy Secretary. And we thought that might be all about disagreements to do with policy and the way in which the Iran war was being conducted. But no, it was about the slow pace at which the president accused the Navy Secretary of commissioning a new class of battleships that Donald Trump wants to name after himself. This is where his mind currently is.
Wow. We'll give you a break by just listening to this clip of Trump on the reflecting pool. Let's listen to this.
And they just started today putting down the material. It's a machine. It lays it very evenly, beautiful. It goes from one side to the other. It'll take about 3 days. And you're going to end up with a beautiful, beautiful reflecting pool the way it's supposed to be.
The way it's supposed to be. I mean, it does make you laugh, doesn't he? He is genuinely more interested in all this, in the building stuff. And the triumphal arch, I mean, so the people who support Trump, but maybe don't share his taste in interior design or exterior design, do they kind of think this has gone too far? He's behaving too much like the kind of monarch whose departure we are going to celebrate on the 4th of July, 250 years later?
Well, I mean, we're going to find out, and we're going to find out partly in November at the midterm elections. I mean, the gap between a president who spent huge amounts of time focused on the gilding needed, allegedly, for the Oval Office, turning it into sort of faux Versailles, talking this week about the reflecting pool. I mean, there was also a long exposition about the changes that he's making to the colonnade, you know, that corridor down which the president leads foreign leaders. It's just outside
next to the Rose Garden,
the Oval Office. He's replacing the stonework there with granite, and we got into the details so much that we actually learned that the granite was from Italy but had been finished in Africa before being sent to the United States. I mean, really detailed, focused stuff about what this was going to look like. Part of it polished, part of it sanded so that presidents wouldn't slip. He's keeping the ramp that FDR needed. He was at pains to point out FDR needed a ramp because of his wheelchair, but out of deference to the memory of FDR, he was going to keep the ramp. This sort of focus on the detail of that stuff versus the fact that when I go and fill the car today, it's going to cost me north of $4 a gallon. And he blithely dismisses the concerns that Americans all over the country, many of them far less capable of filling their cars at that price than I might be. He dismisses those concerns and says, well, the price will drop as soon as the war's over, even at a time when his own Defense Department officials in classified briefings on Capitol Hill are telling lawmakers that even if you manage to sign a peace deal tomorrow, which you won't, it's going to take 6 months before you can be sure that the Strait of Hormuz is cleared of mines. So therefore, the petrol price isn't going immediately to return to the level that it was at before this war began. So his lack of concern for the concerns of everyday voters, while he focuses on all this, you know, gilded stuff in Washington, D.C., is a real opportunity for Democrats to exploit, coupled, of course, with the millions and millions of dollars that he, his family members, and his friends have all made as a direct result of his presidency. And we're beginning to hear several Democrats hammering away at that as they get out onto the campaign trail ahead of November.
I was going to mention that, Karchin. I've just been to Hungary, as you know, and it was personal corruption for Orban and his family and his cronies that helped to defeat him resoundingly at the polls. How much of an Achilles heel is corruption for Trump and his family, especially amongst Republicans? We know Democrats are going on about this, but what about Republicans?
Well, I mean, if Democrats can get their act together, they can make hay with it. But, I mean, look, I think you do have to ask yourself, why are people like former Fox News presenter, right-wing podcaster Tucker Carlson disengaging with Trump? Why are they cutting ties to him? And it is, I think, partly, not only, I mean, in the case of Mr. Carlson, it's also driven by fury over Iran and a belief that he's completely sold out to Israel and to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And there's a whole backstory to that with Tucker Carlson. But partly these influencers are making the point that Donald Trump has simply betrayed his working class Make America Great Again base. And there will be more criticism coming from people like former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, positioning herself as the authentic leader of MAGA and arguing that Donald Trump has simply betrayed all of the principles that he espoused when he was running for office in 2023 and 2024.
Simon Marks, as ever, putting it clearly from the other side of the ocean. Thank you very much indeed. Look forward to speaking to you next week after the royal visit, the state visit to the United States.
After listening to that entire discussion, I think what stood out more than anything else was just how symbolic all of this has become. On the surface, the conversation was about construction projects around the White House, preparations for the royal visit, and some of the dramatic architectural changes that reportedly wants to make across Washington. But underneath all of that was a much deeper argument about power, image, ego, and the direction America is moving in politically. When you hear talk about giant ballrooms, triumphal arches, UFC fights outside the White House, and redesigning historic landmarks while millions of Americans are struggling financially, it creates a very specific perception, whether people want to admit it or not. And I think that's why this conversation becomes politically dangerous for Trump. Because for a lot of voters, especially working-class voters who backed him, believing he would focus primarily on economic hardship inside the United States, this kind of imagery feels disconnected from reality. People are worried about inflation. They're worried about fuel prices. They're worried about rent, groceries, debt, and financial instability. So when discussions start revolving around gold decorations, massive construction projects, and transforming the appearance of Washington, critics are naturally going to ask whether the priorities are completely out of balance. What also caught my attention was the point they raised about how some major conservative voices are beginning to distance themselves from Trump. That matters because movements start fracturing when supporters begin feeling betrayed by the promises that originally brought them together. If influential figures inside the broader conservative media world start openly questioning Trump's decisions, especially on the foreign policy and economic issues, that could create serious problems heading into future elections. Whether people agree with Simon Marks and Matt Fry or not, they were clearly pointing toward the idea that frustration is building beneath the surface in ways that could eventually become politically costly. At the same time, I do think it's important to separate political criticism from emotional exaggeration. Every administration leaves behind physical projects, renovations, and symbolic changes. But the reason this conversation is getting attention is because critics believe these projects reflect something bigger about Trump's personality and leadership style. They see someone who is deeply focused on spectacle, legacy, and visual dominance at a time when many Americans simply want stability and economic relief. Whether that perception is fair or unfair is ultimately up to the public to decide. But those are my thoughts after watching this exchange. Now let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Until next time.